you wanted the best, you've got the best podcast, the hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Looks Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. Ladies and gentlemen, the Artley Sings That Makes Official. Welcome to the big show. As always, for, 16 years and 2,800 episodes, we bring in the Chris Voss Show and the most amazing minds, stories, and journeys, etc., etc. Opinions expressed by guests on the podcast are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the host or the Chris Voss Show. Some guests of the show may be advertising on the podcast, but it is not an endorsement or review of any kind. Today's featured author comes to us from bookstolifemarketing.co.uk. With expert publishing to strategic marketing, they help authors reach their audience and maximize their book success. We have an amazing young man on the show with us today. He's the author of the book called Successful Transformational Change in a Fire and EMS Department, How a Focus Team Created a Revenue Recovery Program in 6 months from scratch. Robert Avsec joins us on the show. We're going to get into it with him and some of the details of some of his work and how he's doing it and how to probably build good teams and all that good stuff. He was a battalion chief paramedic, retired now. He served with the men and women of the Chesterfield County, Virginia Fire Department and EMS Department for 26 years. For his second act, he's used his acquired knowledge, skills, and experiences as a freelance writer for Fire and EMS online trade journals and as a blogger-in-chief for his blog, Talking Shop for Fire and EMS. He's also an operations chief for the Fire Service Psychology Associations, where fire service leaders, psychologists, and master's level clinicians are working to develop the field of fire psychology and bridge the gap between professional psychology and the fire service. He makes his home outside of Charleston, West Virginia, where he enjoys playing golf and alpine skiing. Welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm doing, Chris, and yourself?
I'm doing excellent, and it's wonderful to have you. Give us any .coms, .orgs. Where do you want people to find you on the interwebs?
I am at fireemspro.org. That's my talking shop for Fire and EMS website.
All right. So give us a 30,000 overview. What's inside your new book?
Inside my new book is how we put together a program to start billing insurance companies, Medicare, Medicaid, for emergency ambulance transportation. In our Fire and EMS department, we were facing, rising costs. I mean, ambulances and EMS equipment cost money. And, at the local level, budgets, you're working on budgets a year, 2 years in advance, and it's really hard to get the money that you need to keep the rolling.
Definitely. Taking, let's see, with this, you gave me the org, correct, for yourself?
Yes.
And it's pretty much a thing where, you've worked in this field for a long time. You're trying to help other people get their stuff together. I guess this is a big issue on, creating great team building and revenue recovery program in the field of this business.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. I think the far bigger thing that I got from writing the book, and that a lot of people who have read the book have told me, is that this is bigger than just a fire and EMS department. I mean, every organization has to manage change, big and small. Mm-hmm. In our case, it just happened to be a very big one in a very short period of time.
Hmm. And so give us a little bit of history on you. How did you come up? What made you interested in getting into this industry? Was it like an aha moment? And where did you go from there?
Oh, I'm like most of the firefighters and paramedics of my generation. We grew up watching Emergency on TV.
Oh, yeah.
And who didn't want to be like Johnny and Roy?
Oh, yeah.
And, that became my focus was, how do you get into that business? And I was a kid that grew up in southern New Jersey. wasn't a lot of opportunities up there to get into the field. And so I moved to Richmond, Virginia, and got into the EMS side of the business, working in the city of Richmond for a service that provided the emergency services for Richmond. Started applying to every fire department in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Got my first job with James City County, which is outside of Williamsburg, Virginia, where I was there for about 8 months before I was able to get, a higher paying position with Chesterfield Fire and EMS. And I was there for, like you said, the next 26 years.
And so you learned a lot. Tell us about how you rose to the organization and got to this position where you had to deal with some of these issues and how you dealt with them.
Out of my 26 years, I spent about 9.5 years in what's known as staff positions in fire departments. I was the EMS director for about 3 years. I co-managed our emergency communications center for about 3 years with a really good friend of mine, Sergeant Lieutenant now, Bob Pridemore from the police department. And then my final staff gig was in running the training and safety division for the organization. So I had a lot of staff work, and in between those, you go back into emergency operations for a couple of years, always in a different place than where you left. So I think that provided me an opportunity to, as they say, get a well-rounded education. I learned about budgets. I learned about, how to make those working relationships that you have to get things accomplished, particularly in a public safety agency.
Yeah, it's, I think we had someone on last week who was a firefighter and an EMS, and he's haunted pretty badly by a lot of different experiences he had and things he saw, a little bit of, I guess, PTSD actually. And, it's one of those things that it's really affected him. Yeah.
And that's what motivated me to become a member of FSPA was that, I saw that as an opportunity to, give back to a profession that had given me so much over the years.
Yeah. And it's a hell of a business with the stress that's under. I don't think it's normal you would have with a company. You're dealing with life and death issues there, crisis moments. Everything's an emergency pretty much. That's probably even a harder environment to build good, healthy teams because everything's on fire all at once.
That is one of those things that you have to learn how to adapt to and make it so that it's not part of what you're doing is, yes, for the average fire and EMS department, about maybe 5 to 8% of their work involves response to emergencies. Yeah. The rest of the time you're doing things like training, preparing, and making sure that when the alarm does come in, that you're ready to go. And I think that's what really differentiates our stress from the stress of the average ordinary person, as you say, working for a company or working for their own business. We recognize what the challenges are, and therefore you try to you train so that when you get into those situations, you're not worried about, how do I do this? You're worried about, how do I apply this?
It's all about the training. Right?
Sure. Muscle memory.
Muscle memory.
Yeah.
So fun is fun. Now, do you counsel or coach or consult on or speak on some of these topics and help other agencies handle the issues they have?
As I said, our mission with FSPA is to get more clinicians who know what firefighters do, how they do it, why they do it, what are the stressors, et cetera, because that's the number one identified barrier to firefighters and EMS personnel getting care is they can't find a clinician who understands them. Okay. And then on the other side of the river is the fire service that looks across at psychology with kind of a skeptical eye because they have trouble finding people who understand. it's not a everyday 9 to 5 job, and those kinds of things. So what we do is that's where we do a lot of advocacy. Last month we were at the Congressional Fire Services Institute in Washington, bringing that advocacy and awareness to the needs of fire and EMS personnel. We have an annual conference in October. This year will be in Portland, Oregon, and we bring together some of the best speakers that are working in the field. And it's the first and only conference where every presentation is focused on firefighter mental and behavioral health.
Oh.
Those are the things that we do to, as I say, build that bridge.
Most people think about transformational change in government or public safety taking years. What made it possible for your team to build a revenue recovery program from absolutely zero in 6 months?
Deadline.
So you set a deadline, said we're going to do this?
No. We had a deadline. Deadline. Our fire chief, Steve Ellswick, heck of a guy, had been working for a couple of years with our board of supervisors to get them to approve this revenue recovery process, billing for emergency ambulance transportation. In fact, they had even done a study that showed us that 92% of the emergency transports that we were doing would be covered by private insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, and that we would only have to work with that other 8% to help them, manage any bill that they got. So, we worked out a sliding scale based on income that, you could get a reduced rate for your emergency ambulance transportation. And I emphasize emergency ambulance transportation, because that's the only thing that insurance and Medicare and Medicaid pay for is, you absolutely, your medical condition required that you had to have ambulance transportation to get to the hospital. So it's not like we were able to bill for every call that we went on.
Yeah.
Again, he was kind of fighting an uphill battle here, and then September 11th came along. And with that, the terrorist attacks on Washington and New York City and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, people, fire departments had to start preparing for, this new threat of especially bioterrorism. We had the powder scares.
Yep.
Happening all over the place in the post offices and in businesses. And, that required us to obtain protective clothing and monitoring equipment that we never had before. And the chief just saw that as that's just further taking away potential resources that we needed to keep ambulances in good condition, our people well-trained, and give them the equipment they need to do their job. And so we went back to the board of supervisors and laid this out in that format. And they said in November of 2001, they said, go for it. But you got to get it done by July 1st. Because the reason was the Chesterfield County's budget cycle runs July 1 to June 30.
Wow.
So they wanted to have it in place before the new budget year began in July 1, 2002. And so that's where the deadline came from. Was, you got to get it done. You need to be billing, because that's how we're going to determine what your budget allocation is for that next fiscal year. Okay. And so that's where the deadline came from. And it proved to be a most people would probably look at that and go, oh gosh, 6 months. But in retrospect, especially after we look back on the project, we said, that was really a good thing. Because it's what drove the creation of a focused team. I had been attending classes at the National Fire Academy for many years, 2-week residence programs up there. And it always amazed me that I could sit down in a classroom on Monday morning with 25 people that I didn't know from Adam from all over the country. And we would be formed into, 4 or 5 person teams and given a project and said, yeah, you have to have this ready to present out next Wednesday. And it always happened. And so I was having a discussion one day with Chief Ellswick, and we were talking about, we got this revenue recovery thing. How are we going to get it done? And I told him that same story. And I said, I think if we could pull together 5 or 6 people and say, this is your job, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and weekends, this is your job to get this done. But that's how important this is to our organization. And don't you know it? I talked myself right into a job.
That's a good thing.
I was one of the 6.
And you described this as 2 transformational changes happening at once. Why was tackling both simultaneously risky? Why was it the right decision?
It was risky, but we didn't know about it until we embarked on the original project of a revenue recovery system. And as we got working into the nuts and bolts, one of the first things we had to do is we had to contract with a third-party vendor to do the billing. Okay, because that wasn't something we wanted to be involved with. The other organizations that we had talked to, particularly when they were doing that feasibility study, said you don't want to do the billing. You want to contract that out to people that's what they do. That's what they. And when we did that, the first thing that our new vendor said to us was, "You guys use paper right now. If you can convert your people to using electronic patient care reports, you'll probably see a 20% better recovery than if you don't, because paramedics' handwriting is awful, especially since we were going to be faxing those billable tickets to the vendor. You know how well even the best document comes out the other end on a fax.
Oh, totally.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah. So that became the impetus for the electronic billing, and that was the second part of the project. That look again when we did the post-mortem on what went well, what didn't go well, etc. That was the one thing we said, we should have recognized that up front, and probably put that farther up in the timetable and the timeline, so that it was getting the necessary resources in terms of time from the get-go. Firefighters, we pivoted.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're getting a little breakup on the line. Okay. So you did that. And then, in a lot of you write about how resistance to change is almost guaranteed in fire and EMS organizations. What surprised you most where resistance came from and where it didn't? And where were some of the ways you overcame it?
Surprisingly, the issue, the big resistance wasn't so much with the frontline personnel, firefighters and paramedics that would be doing the billing, et cetera. Okay. Surprisingly, it was middle management. The battalion chiefs that were suddenly going to, we were telling them that, hey, it's going to be your responsibility to make sure that billing is not an issue. Okay. The prime goal is a quality billable ticket on the first go. Okay, because if it goes to the billing vendor and they can't submit, then that requires additional work on their part, et cetera, et cetera. As middle managers, this is a new role for you. You have to become the quality control and the quality improvement part of this. Okay, that if there are problems coming from one of the stations in your battalion, you need to get in there and find out what's going on and get it fixed.
Yep. Definitely.
Yeah.
And, good management is hard to do and focusing on teams. You emphasize on a focus team rather than heroic leadership. What did you intentionally do differently in how the team was formed and empowered to make sure that it was a focus team as opposed to?
Well, it's interesting because that team, our team leader was the deputy chief of operations. He had 3 battalion chiefs, a captain, and 2 paramedics, firefighter paramedics on the team, right? So in any fire department, that's a hell of a rank structure right there, right? And fire departments are typically very hierarchical, right? If deputy chief tells you to jump, you say how high on the way up. All right.
Yeah.
But he demonstrated some really great leadership by telling us from day one. He said, when we walk through that door every morning, we're 6 Joes working on this project, and everybody's input matters. You're all here because Chief Ellswick and I believe that each of you brings something unique to this team. And, we can't let how many bars you got on your collar or how many stripes on your sleeve get in the way of that. And I think that just absolutely set the tone. But more importantly, that's how it really worked.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, team building, would you find that a lot of the lessons you learn and espouse in your book about teams and team building and goals and achieving, do you find that a lot of those are transposed over into corporate stuff as well?
Oh, I think when you talk about managing change and when you talk about, getting people to work together as team, particularly when you're talking cross-sectional, people from different departments in an organization, et cetera, it's all fruit. Some of you may be apples, some of you may be oranges, but in the end, if everybody coming together is in agreement that, hey, we're here to do what's best for the organization, let's figure out, the best thing we can do is figure out how quickly we can start working together.
Yeah. A lot of organizations, like you say, we're all fruit. But, I don't know. I have some people that work at our office that are vegetables, I'm pretty sure. I'm talking about their brains. Bob, that's you, Bob. We're talking about you. No, Bob's the catch-all for everything we say bad about anything. It's always Bob's fault. So he's the catch-all for the thing. We don't have an employee by name Bob, by the way. We just that's an effigy. We just throw stuff at. So yeah, and a lot of these lessons, they can be transposed to business and everything else. Revenue recovery and emergency services can be emotionally and politically charged. You talk about in the book. How did you address the fear that billing might conflict with the mission to serve everyone?
I think the biggest thing that we did was we didn't focus on the recovery part, the money part. We focused on sustaining the mission. This is what we need to keep putting quality ambulances on the street that are critical to the safety and welfare of our people as well as the people who we're transporting to the hospital. It's critical to the training and education that we give to our entry-level employees as well as the continuing training for our incumbent employees so that we can continue to provide high-quality EMS care and then to make sure that they have the best equipment. Biomedical equipment is not cheap. When you start talking about things like heart monitors and oxygen monitors and setups and all those kinds of things that paramedics need to do their job properly and provide good patient care, those things all cost money. And that's what we focused on. We focused on this is how we can sustain the good stuff that we're doing over time. And I think that's what that was the message that we promoted to the public in the video that we presented, the brochures that we mailed out, the public appearances that we made. That was the message. This isn't about money. This is about being able to provide you and your families with quality emergency medical care if and when you need it.
Yeah. I mean, it's life and death with quality care, but you deal with lots of different things in the deal of being in the business. And you talk throughout the book about having a strong theme of communication, weekly updates, internal, external messaging. What specific communication messages should leaders most often make, especially during like major changes where they're trying to maybe turn the company around, et cetera, et cetera?
I think the key to our communication was that it was early and often. Okay, early and often. It started off with our fire chief addressing all of our first line supervisors over the course of 3 days, and explained, his vision, why we need this, why we're doing it, all the things I just explained to you. That was his message to them, okay? Because these are the people that had to lead that change. First line supervisors, we call them company officers in fire departments. They manage 90% of a fire department's resources, the people, the equipment, the fire stations. So you have to get those people on your team right from the very beginning, and Chief Ellswick continued with that communication, not only to our people, but also to the board of supervisors who had, put their faith in him to get this thing done. So it wasn't a case of, you don't hear from me until we're done. It was a case of this is the progress that we're making. This is the progress. The internal communication was critical. Our project sponsor, Deputy Chief Paul Shorter, he had a standing appointment to meet with the fire chief every Friday at 1:00 to give him a status update of what we had gotten accomplished that week and what we were going to get done the next week. So the fire chief was then just as informed as we were, and was able to go back to the board of supervisors, go out to those meetings with those town hall meetings with the public, armed with the best and latest information about how this thing is going. And I think that's what people want to hear. They want to hear action.
Yep.
They want
action, not
words. They want to know, is the glass half full? Is the glass 3/4 full? How are things going?
Yep. Communication is so important because it helps manage expectations. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
I'll give you an example. If you look at Disneyland, and I think everyone's probably been to Disneyland or Disney World in their life, maybe at least once by now. And when you go there, they have, these huge lines for every ride pretty much, but they tell you how long you expect to wait. So it'll say current waiting time is 2 hours. And they found that people, if they know, what the wait times are, or what the demands are, or what the expectations are of management, et cetera, if they know what they are, they're more willing to comply with them and exercise them and not complain about it because they know. And if you're ambiguous, you're not communicating, you're icing everyone out of understanding what anything's going on, then you're going to have all sorts of chaos that grows out of the lack of information being delivered and the lack of expectations. But if you say to people, especially if it's something hard or challenging that the company's going to have to do to come together, you've got to get everybody on the same team and kumbaya and so, over communication is really important. I think especially during change, you kind of have to over communicate. Hey, this is working. Hey, this isn't working. We need to do this, constantly, feedback and information. And as long as people are aware of what's going on, they're usually pretty on board with stuff. I'm trying to think. There was a situation I was in recently where I had to wait for something, but someone told me how long the wait was. And it wasn't too bad. And I was like, 7 minutes or so. I can't remember the instance, but I was willing to do it because they told me how long it was going to take, and they were right, on how long it would take,
Just think how frustrated we get when we're in our car out on the highway and traffic's not moving.
Yeah.
It's if somebody could just tell you, there's an accident 2 miles ahead of you, All right. And it's probably going to be 30 minutes before we can get traffic moving at its normal pace. Think what that would do to road rage.
Yeah. There is an app called the Waze. The Waze app, and I think it's owned by Google, so I think they incorporate some of the data, and it will do that. It will say, if I need to go across town and it's a half an hour drive, and there's an accident or something in the way, it will show the backed up traffic where you can maybe exit off to go around it.
Oh, I gotta get me one of them.
Yeah, it's called WAZE. Waze. It's been around since 2011. Great technology. And so anywhere you go, you can put in where you want to go. It will tell you the time it will take you to get there. And they got it down to a science of seconds. And if there's something that comes up on your route there, sometimes they'll reroute you to a much faster route, or they'll show you, there's a police car here, there's a crash here. And then you can see you can see like this red and orange, usually colors that will indicate there's a slowdown, like especially on the freeway. And then you kind of know, you're like, oh, I should probably pull off the next exit and avoid that, maybe go through the frontage road. And, that's a way of just communicating to people. Obviously, it's not government run, but communicating to people how to do it. And even if you do get caught on the freeway in traffic, you can at least look at it and be like, okay, they're still moving about 40 miles an hour according to the Waze data. It can measure how fast everyone's moving, either normally or in the slowdown situation. And, but yeah, communication is key. I mean, it really is. And what you tell people and how you work with people through those issues. And a lot of this transposes to corporations as well.
The biggest thing that we did that, again, we were constantly treading on new soil, was we conducted focus groups that hit every fire station and every shift in the department. At that time, we had probably about 250 uniformed personnel. Okay. We did these focus groups and we went out in teams of 2, and Chief Shorter told us, he said, listen, you got to really make sure that you don't talk. You want them to talk. Okay. Your job is to get as much of it down on easel paper as you can and bring those easel papers back here. And that's literally what we did. We would come back from a focus group and we would pepper the conference room that was our workplace with those easel paper and distill the issues down. We asked questions like, what don't you like about what's coming? What are your fears? What do you got any suggestions on how we can make this, work? We just collected tons of data like that, and we're able to streamline it down to where that became the basis for our communication strategy. Because we realized this is not just who we need to talk to on a continual basis, but what are their hot buttons? What are the things we got to keep talking about? What are the things that we've got to keep giving them information about to keep them on the positive side of this thing?
Yeah. And listening, like what you talk about there, listening, super important.
Yeah, that's a real hard thing for firefighters to do because we're so used to response. So when somebody gives you a problem, I always said that my battalion chief business card should have said professional problem solver. Because that's what we do.
Yeah.
That's what we do. We're the only 24-hour service in town. When people don't know who to call, they call the fire department.
Yeah. It's a pretty wild world. And a lot of this, like I say, can transpose to corporations. You write from the perspective of someone who is in the arena and not an outside consultant. How did that insider role with you help? When did it make change harder, maybe?
I think it helped in that, one of the hardest things for any fire department, people working in a fire department, is having outsiders coming in. Because there's that distrust that's, hey, they don't know how we do things. They don't understand what we do, etc. Okay. So being inside the organization, that's one barrier you didn't have to overcome. But then on the other side, you got that part about, I know Chief Avsec when he was my battalion chief, so he's a good guy. Okay, that's cool. Or somebody else says, when I worked with him at this station, wherever, I thought he was a butt. And that was true for everybody on the team, because all of us had a lot of different experiences in different parts of the organizations. When you're moving around that much and you're working with that many people, you're going to pick up baggage. So that was one thing that we had to be cognizant of, especially when we were doing focus groups, or once we got started with the training process of how this all gets done. We just had to all be very cognizant of what is the potential baggage that might be getting in my way in getting these things done with folks.
Yeah. I mean, and if you're, when people see you as an outsider, sometimes they're like, he doesn't really understand who we are or what we do.
Yeah. You spend too much time overcoming that, as opposed to being able to get going from day one because people know you.
For firefighters and EMS leaders listening right now, or just any CO leaders, you can apply all this data to that of any company listening right now who are overwhelmed by change. What's the first practical step that you would advise them to take this week using your model in your books?
Shrink the problem.
What was that?
Shrink the problem.
Shrink the problem.
Yeah. I always remember the old thing about you can't eat an elephant in one bite. But you got to pick the most important part, and then focus your time, your energy, and your effort on getting that done, so that you can get a good, solid win under your belt. Because then then whatever has to come after that becomes, you're building upon that success. Okay. When we got into the training process of how to create billable tickets and how to use the software, all of those things, those were built upon the success of our early communication of why. Why is this important? Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to know the why before you get into any of the what, and especially any of the how. So I think that was a key.
That was the key. And then finally, if you had to distill the book down to one uncomfortable truth about leadership and change in public safety, what would it be?
Yeah, you have to be authentic.
Authentic.
Yeah, you have to be authentic. As like I said, one of the first thing that Chief Ellswick did was, address the membership. He spoke to the people who were going to have to get it done and let them know that, this is what I am committed to doing to make this successful. Okay. And, just the fact that he pulled 6 of us out of our normal jobs, that meant somebody else was going to have to do our job while we were gone. So that was his big thing was, look, we're going to get this done. This is what I am dedicated to giving to you to get it done. I'm asking you to come on this journey with me. And I think that that being authentic, being honest with people, and going back to some of the things we first talked about, communicate. You're not just communicating expectations, but sooner or later, you got to start communicating progress. You got to give people tangible things that are happening.
Mm-hmm. And, being authentic is really important because people know when CEOs or leaders are faking it. They don't really care. They're just kind of going through the motions and stuff, Give me your TPS reports. That Office Space show. So as we go out, give people a final pitch out to pick up your book, .coms. Where can they find out more about you?
I'm a very, very large presence on LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn. I've got my website there that I write my blog, Talking Shop, for Fire and EMS, and the book is available at Amazon.com. And the big thing I would say to anybody who says, "Do I want to look at this?" I say, take a look and give it a read, because I'm pretty sure there's going to be at least 3 things that are going to go, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah. This is wonderful and great leadership that I think transposes even the emergency business. We had somebody on last week who talked about emergency things and life, and it's a high stress environment. I had a friend who became an EMT right at the beginning of COVID, and the horrors and stories and PTSD he had to deal with from some of the things they would find. They'd find people who'd died, a couple weeks, and, no one knew they were missing because everyone was in lockdown. Yeah. And, they would find these bodies, and it was just not fun. Let's put it that way. And it was a scary time. It's a high pressure business, but I think a lot of the stuff in your book can be transposed to it. So thank you very much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it, sir.
Man, I appreciate the opportunity to have this chat with you.
Thank you. And thanks, friends, for tuning in. Order up his book wherever fine books are sold. It's called Successful Transformational Change in a Fire and EMS Department, How a Focus Team Created a Revenue Recovery Program in 6 months from Scratch, by Robert Avsec. Thanks for tuning in to the show. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss 1 on the TikTokity, and all those crazy places on the interwebs. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you guys next time.
You've been listening to the most amazing, intelligent podcast ever made to improve your brain and your life. Warning, consuming too much of the Chris Voss Show podcast can lead to people thinking you're smarter, younger, and irresistible sexy. Consume in regularly moderated amounts. Consult a doctor for any resulting brain bleed.